They trained you in reverse. Before you could even form your own thoughts, they stuffed your mind with theirs. Not to enlighten you, but to limit you. They called it education, but it was conditioning. They called it discipline, but it was obedience training. They told you to raise your hand before speaking, to color inside the lines, to sit still, to behave, to conform. They punished curiosity. They sterilized wonder. And every time you asked why, they answered with distractions wrapped in politeness and warnings disguised as wisdom. They fed you labels like food: gifted, polite, average, troubled, as if a soul could be reduced to a sentence. But you felt the fracture, even when you didn't have words for it yet. You knew something was wrong. They gave you gold stars for obedience and called it achievement. They told you that if you just followed the steps, you'd be rewarded. But all you saw were tired faces, wearing invisible chains, grinding out lives that looked nothing like freedom. And deep down, you knew you weren't made for that. You were not built for applause. You were built for ascent. You were made for conquest. But you had to survive their maze first. You had to navigate the fog of false certainty to avoid the traps disguised as paths. Because this world doesn't raise warriors. It raises workers, consumers, obedient echoes of the same worn-out frequency. And most, they never break out. They decorate the prison, hang up their degree, celebrate milestones inside a simulation, mistaking motion for meaning, mistaking repetition for purpose. But a warrior? We're wired differently. We don't settle for the answers handed to us. We interrogate them. We don't digest belief systems. We dissect them. And when the truth doesn't come easily, we go surgical. We dig. We strike. We dismantle. Because real intelligence doesn't begin with more data. It begins with demolition. It's not about adding knowledge. It's about erasing the lies. It's not about building on top of what they gave you. It's about burning it to the ground and constructing a fortress of your own design. You want to evolve? Start with destruction. Tear down the scaffolding they wrapped around your perception. Drop the hammer on every unquestioned concept. You were never meant to inherit a mind. You were meant to forge one. You look a belief dead in the eyes and break it. You flip it, reverse it, inject it with its opposite, and force it to stand trial. If it survives, keep it. If it shatters, bury it. That's not chaos. That's clarity. Because the average mind is a prison built out of agreement, out of passed down fears, out of polite assumptions never tested. They live in rooms furnished by other people's certainty, wallpapered with approval. And when they feel the walls closing in, they call it responsibility. But you weren't born to decorate a cage. You weren't born to rehearse someone else's life. You weren't born to echo. You were born to invade, to redesign the battlefield, to move with silence, to strike with strategy, to build a mind so weaponized that no system can subdue it. You don't accept structure. You infiltrate it. You don't wait for change. You become it. And when the time comes to demolish, you don't hesitate. Because you know the truth. The real war isn't fought out there. It begins in the mind. And most were trained to lose before it ever started. But not you. You're the glitch, the error in their equation, the storm they never prepared for. So bring the hammer, bring the fire, because it's time to break what they built and rise from the ruins with a mind of your own design. Phase 1. The war on narrative. Before the warrior sharpens their blade, They must sharpen their perception. Because if your vision is tainted, it doesn't matter how powerful your strike is. You'll always swing at the wrong enemy. And the greatest enemy of clarity is the narrative. Not reality, not fact, but the story you wrapped around it. The invisible script your ego wrote in the background and fed to your nervous system like truth. Understand this. Your mind does not record life like a camera. It edits, it scripts, it dramatizes. Every wound becomes a theater. Every failure, a monologue. Every rejection, a betrayal scene. The woman didn't leave. She abandoned you. You didn't fail. You disgraced yourself. You weren't corrected. You were attacked. These are not facts. These are emotional overlays. Desperate attempts to turn pain into identity. To make wounds meaningful, even if it means carrying them like trophies. But a warrior doesn't serve their wounds. We cut through them. The war on narrative begins when you stop asking, "How did it feel?" and start asking, "What actually happened?" She left. That's it. The job ended. That's it. The decision failed. That's it. No adjectives, no symbols, no tragic music playing in the background. Just signal, just fact. Because once you separate the event from the emotion, you reclaim control over your operating system. You stop reliving the same pain just to feel significant. You stop justifying stagnation with stories that make you the victim, the martyr, the misunderstood genius. You were none of those things. You were just triggered. And triggers are not prophecies. They're just reminders of unprocessed fiction. You see, every narrative has one thing in common. It wants to feel right, even if it's false. It wants to protect the ego, not reveal the truth. But a warrior doesn't want to feel right. A warrior wants to see right. So you go in like a surgeon. You isolate the distortion. You tear apart the script, line by line. You find the sentence that keeps you stuck, and you delete it. And when you do, you feel a sudden silence. That's not emptiness. That's space. Mental real estate. No longer occupied by ghosts. Now you're free to install truth. Not comforting illusions, but real, raw, unfiltered truth. You didn't get rejected. You got information. You didn't fail. You collected feedback. You weren't destroyed. You were shown a blind spot. And this mindset isn't cold. It's sovereign. Because when you kill the narrative, you kill the need to explain yourself to anyone. You don't walk into conversations needing to be understood. You walk in with clarity. You don't rehearse what you'll say. You already know what you see. That's the gift of narrative deletion. You remove the fog, and in its place, unbreakable awareness. While others relive their pain, you refine your perception. While they spiral in loops, you sharpen in lines. While they feel stuck in a story, you operate in truth. Because the warrior doesn't fight shadows. They switch on the light and burn the script to ash. This is not about becoming numb. It's about becoming accurate. Because only when your perception is clean can your decisions become surgical. And only when your decisions are surgical can your mission become unshakable. So begin here. Rip out the story. Isolate the infection. Delete the drama. And stand in the silence that remains. Because that silence, that's not emptiness. That's your mind, unshackled, ready, and finally, armed. Phase 2, Mirror Neuron Override. There's a reason why most people can't hold their ground. It's not because they're weak. It's because their biology was never designed for sovereignty. You think you're in control of your emotions? You think your thoughts are your own? No. They've been hijacked, not by algorithms, not by ideologies, but by the people standing right next to you. Because your nervous system wasn't built for truth. It was built for tribe, for mimicry, for survival through sameness. It's ancient code, buried deep in your brainstem. You enter a room, and your heart rate shifts to match the loudest fear in the room. You hear a yawn, and suddenly you're tired. You sense tension, and your muscles tighten. Not because you chose it, but because they did. This is mirror neuron warfare. And unless you override it, you are a puppet. Think about it. How many of your breakdowns were borrowed? How many bad moods were mirrored, not earned? How many of your decisions were shaped by the emotional residue of someone else? A warrior doesn't allow their nervous system to be hacked by strangers. We fortify. And the first step is brutal. You stop sinking. Not with hatred, not with arrogance, with discipline. You start by mastering your face. No unnecessary expressions, no emotional leakage. You compress your micro muscles into stillness, not to appear stoic, but to sever the reflex. You anchor your gaze, not on their eyes, but just past them. Not to disconnect, but to detach from their emotional current. You lower your breathing. You press it deep into your diaphragm. Each breath tells your system, we are not threatened. We are not prey. We are command. You become immune to energy shifts in the room, immune to tone, to panic, to volatility. While others rise and fall with the crowd, you remain untouched. This isn't suppression. It's redirection. You are not rejecting emotion. You are refusing to absorb the infection. Because here's the hidden cost of mimicry. It steals your clarity. It hijacks your rhythm. And once your rhythm is gone, you're reacting to their beat, not your own. But once the override is installed, you don't just stay calm, you change the climate. You walk into a room full of chaos, and the energy buckles under your stillness. People slow down. They lower their voice. They shift their posture. Not because you told them to, but because their mirror neurons are now syncing to you. You flip the weapon. You're no longer a receiver. You're the source. And when you're the source, you become invisible to manipulation, immune to bait, dead to the tricks that work on everyone else. Now you can sit across from an angry person and feel nothing. Now you can absorb panic, convert it into pattern recognition, and make decisions they thought impossible under pressure. This isn't coldness. This isn't apathy. This is sovereignty of the nervous system. It's psychological stealth. Because the person who feels everything is a hostage. But the one who feels nothing uninvited, that person becomes unguarded, undetected, and unbeatable. You weren't born to mirror. You were born to override. And when that override becomes instinct, you no longer survive the social matrix. You navigate it like a shadow in armor. You move unseen. You move undisturbed. You move without leaving a trace. Except the undeniable presence that makes others question their own rhythm. That's the warrior advantage. Not brute strength, not louder words, but a nervous system that's been recoded to obey command, not chaos. You're no longer part of the storm. You stabilize it. And when others break, you build. You become the one who remains calm when they scream, who holds position when they scatter, who strikes only after all signals are read. This isn't survival. This is signal dominance. And once you have it, the world has no idea what you're thinking, but they feel it, and they never forget it. Phase 3. Collapse of the simulation. Reality. You think you live in it? You think you see it as it is? No. You see it through a lens you didn't build. You move through a simulation you never consented to. A map drawn by hands that do not have your destiny in mind. From birth, they injected definitions into your psyche like software. They told you what to want before you had language, what to fear before you felt danger, what to become before you knew what you were. Success? It means prestige, applause, job titles. Love? It means sacrifice, possession, pain masquerading as passion. Confidence? It's loudness, arrogance, walking tall even when you're hollow. Failure? It's the end, a brand, a scarlet letter etched on your pride. But none of that was yours. None of that was real. It was pre-installed. You were born with vision, and they gave you a filter. Now you don't see what is. You see what you were told to see. And here's the most dangerous part. That filter is invisible. You don't question it because you don't know it exists. You chase dreams that aren't yours. You compare yourself to metrics you never agreed to. You fail at a life you never wanted and call it falling behind. But a warrior doesn't chase the simulation. We burn it. We initiate collapse. Strategic, surgical, brutal. We question every single inherited definition, every assumption that makes us move in predictable patterns. We strip every word to its bones. And when it crumbles, when the scaffolding breaks, what's left? Freedom. But not the freedom they sell you. Not the live your truth slogan painted over chains. We're talking about true cognitive freedom. The ability to define, encode, and reprogram meaning from the ground up. So here's what you do. You take the word success. You kill it. You don't chase validation. You build leverage. You build execution architecture. You define success as quiet control under loud chaos. You take the word confidence. You strip it of flash. You redefine it as emotional control under volatility. Not charisma, not swagger, but cold consistency under internal war. You take the word failure. You delete the shame. You replace it with iteration, feedback. Each loss becomes a recalibration, not a gravestone. You take the word love. You destroy the fairy tale. You see it for what it is, a neurochemical contract, sustained by rhythm, ruptured by trauma, held together by illusion, unless consciously maintained. And truth? It's no longer what you were taught. It's what remains after everything you were taught has burned. This is the collapse. And when it's complete, your brain doesn't respond to praise. It doesn't react to guilt. It doesn't flinch at shame. Why? Because those signals were written for an identity that no longer exists. You've stopped inheriting meaning. Now you construct it. You don't absorb the world's frame. You generate your own. This isn't rebellion. It's reprogramming. And now that you've collapsed the simulation, you no longer respond like a puppet. You design your rhythm. You initiate your vision. Every word becomes a weapon. Every meaning becomes yours. Every thought obeys your strategy, not society's superstition. That's when you stop playing the game and start rewriting it. Because warriors don't accept the world as delivered. We interrogate it. We collapse it. We strip it to dust. And from that dust, we build something real, something designed for wartime clarity, not peacetime delusion. The simulation was built to tame you. You were built to tear it down. Now let it fall and build from the ash. Phase 4. Perception as a weapon. Most people think perception is passive. They think observation is neutral. They walk through life as sponges, absorbing what's in front of them, reacting to it, and mistaking that for awareness. But warriors know better. Perception isn't a mirror. It's a weapon. And in the hands of the undisciplined, it's dull, bending to whatever force it encounters. But in the hands of a warrior, it becomes surgical. It becomes gravitational. It becomes the blade that cuts through masks, lies, and emotional static. The weak observe to feel included. You observe to gain leverage. This isn't about looking harder. It's about seeing deeper. It's about training your mind to extract intel where others see noise. Before a word leaves someone's lips, you've already seen the hesitation in their blink. Before they express doubt, you've watched the micro flicker in their brow, the slight compression in their throat, the shift in breath patterns they don't even know they made. While others are waiting for someone to talk, you're already inside the subtext. Because most people speak in distraction. They fill the air to hide their fragility. But when you anchor your stillness, when your body gives away nothing, when your eyes remain still and locked, you create something they cannot fake. Exposure. Your presence becomes pressure. You don't need volume. You don't need aggression. You need precision. That's how perception becomes dominance. When someone speaks to you, you don't listen to their words. You scan for contradiction. You track the frequency behind the speech. You read not what they say, but what they avoid saying. And then when you speak, you don't react to their noise. You fire directly into their narrative. You reflect them back to themselves, not with judgment, but with pure, uncomfortable clarity. You don't need to attack. You reveal. You don't need to confront. You collapse illusions by exposing what they're hiding from. Most people crave being seen, but when they actually are, they tremble because they realize how long they've been hiding, even from themselves. And that's when your presence begins to edit the environment. You don't raise your voice, but the room quiets. You don't demand respect, but they shift their posture. They explain things they never intended to say, not to impress you, but to be understood by you. Because your gaze doesn't entertain personas. It penetrates through them. This isn't charisma. This is perceptual warfare. Because you're not chasing control. You're generating it. You don't win conversations with louder points. You win them by framing the entire terrain. Most people fight over what's being said. You control what's being seen. And here's the truth they'll never teach you. The person who defines the frame controls the outcome. Because reality isn't about truth. It's about interpretation. And the one who can influence how things are interpreted can shape what becomes true for everyone in the room. So when you walk into a space, you're not reacting to its mood. You're rewriting it. And the reason this works? Because perception is tempo. And tempo is power. You don't speak quickly. You pause. You let silence create discomfort. You let the weight of what's unsaid do the damage. This throws off their rhythm. And once rhythm is broken, thought becomes scattered. Defense becomes fragile. And now, you own the field. You walk in not just with information, but with intentional awareness. You make every glance count. Every word land like a controlled strike. Every pause calibrated to destabilize. They feel naked in your presence. Not because you stripped them, but because their mask couldn't hold under your gaze. This is how perception becomes power. Not by knowing more, but by seeing cleaner. Not by reacting, but by holding enough stillness that the world exposes itself. Most people were taught to speak to be seen. You've learned how to observe to control, because warriors don't ask for power. We train perception until power submits to our presence. Not through fear, not through intimidation, through awareness so sharp, reality doesn't know how to hide anymore. Phase 5. Temporal warfare. The art of time compression. The average person doesn't run out of time. They leak it. They drip seconds into empty rituals, into overthinking, into explaining themselves to people who don't even listen. They walk through life like time is an infinite stream, like there's always another hour waiting around the corner. But a warrior knows the truth. Time doesn't pass. It collapses, quietly, without warning, without mercy. Not all at once, but in moments. The moment you hesitate, the moment you linger in indecision, the moment you wait for the right time that never comes. That's where life is lost. Not in the storms, but in the pauses. So you must make a choice. Operate like the herd, measuring life in years, hoping the future rescues the present. Or become a tactician of time, a weapon of compressed execution. Because the warrior doesn't move faster. They cut distance. They don't panic. They prioritize with brutality. They see time not as hours or days, but as a series of decision loops, tiny cycles of clarity, execution, review, each one stacked like armor, each one a deliberate strike. You don't ask, how much time do I have? You ask, how many cycles can I complete before they blink? This is temporal warfare, and the battleground is every minute of your day. You look at every task with surgical precision, execute in 2 minutes or reject in 10 seconds. No gray zones, no emotional buffering, no negotiating with distraction. You build or you discard, you move or you bleed time. And conversations? They're not social comfort. They're strategic filters. Does this build leverage? Does it reveal truth? Does it redirect momentum? If not, it dies in your mind before it steals your energy. Because warriors don't argue to win opinions. We argue to reshape outcomes. And if an outcome isn't on the table, we walk. This is how time becomes a weapon. Meetings that don't move needles, cut. Ideas that don't produce action, gone. People who circle the same doubts for years, removed. You start rejecting everything that dilutes focus. You stop explaining yourself to maintain illusions. You stop waiting for permission to create collisions. And here's the paradox. While everyone else is stuck in long-term plans, you're running micro loops that produce exponential growth. You refine after every interaction. You adapt before the next wave hits. You pivot mid-sentence while they're still finishing their thoughts. You begin to feel like you've bent time, but you haven't. You've compressed it. You've shrunk distance between idea and action, between vision and velocity. That's why they mistake you for a genius. Not because you know more, but because you loop faster. You close feedback gaps while others are still warming up. They rely on motivation. You rely on tempo control. They wait for opportunity. You engineer momentum by slicing dead weight every hour. And when others are still revisiting old doubts, you've built new systems. This isn't hustle culture. This isn't work harder. It's mental minimalism under extreme scrutiny. It's living like every second matters, because it does. And eventually, you reach a state where your response time outpaces their reaction speed, where your inner processing becomes a silent weapon, where your decisions are made before the question is finished. That's not luck. That's not speed. That's compressed execution built from sovereign discipline. And when it becomes second nature, you no longer follow time. You drive it. You fold it. You wield it. Because warriors don't wait to be productive. We remove friction until momentum is the only outcome. And in the battlefield of modern time, those who move deliberately, decisively, and ruthlessly fast, those are the ones who outlast, outbuild, outmaneuver, not with luck, not with talent, but with total war against delay, relentless prioritization, and a mind sharpened by cycles, not clocks. This is how you break free from linear living. This is how you outperform those with more resources, more years, more support. Because in temporal warfare, the most dangerous warrior is the one who learned how to bend time by cutting everything else. Phase 6, Tactical Identity Engineering. They told you to be yourself, but they never told you where that self came from. They never told you it was stitched together in shadows, formed not by truth, but by trauma, not by choice, but by collision, by the echoes of authority, the reflexes of survival, and the patterns you copied just to endure. The average person treats identity like a monument, something sacred, permanent, untouchable. But warriors know, identity is not a monument. It's a construction site. And most identities are built by accident, molded in childhood, modified by shame, approved by insecure peers, and reinforced by society's dull repetition. They told you to be authentic. But what if your authenticity is a pattern you learn to avoid punishment? What if your default self is a puppet, performing on a stage built by someone else's expectations? The warrior doesn't find themselves. They design themselves. We don't ask, "Who am I?" We ask, "What version of me wins this war?" This is tactical identity engineering, a complete teardown and reconstruction of your emotional, verbal, and behavioral blueprint. Not to deceive the world, but to deploy a more dangerous version of yourself into it. So you begin the process. You ask, what tone disables manipulation before it begins? What posture makes people question their attack before they act? What energy field causes threats to hesitate and allies to respect without being told? You're not choosing personality traits. You're choosing strategic assets. You're equipping armor that doesn't rust in uncertainty. You're building a signal that reprograms the emotional algorithm of every room you walk into. And this isn't fake. This is focused. Your true self isn't a feeling. It's a function. You might have been kind, but maybe kindness was how you avoided confrontation. You might have been humble, but maybe humility was camouflage for insecurity. You might have been soft-spoken, but maybe silence was a mask you wore when the world taught you your voice wasn't safe. A warrior audits all of it. We do not carry old traits into new wars. So you test your own edges. Do I need to become colder? Not cruel, but unshakable. Do I need to develop humor as a blade, to redirect tension and control pacing? Do I need to remove softness from my voice and install precision? And you don't ask for permission to evolve. You initiate the shift. You don't explain your change to people still trapped in old versions of you. You let them catch up, if they can. Because the warrior doesn't adapt to people. We adapt to the environment and make people adapt to us. You stop identifying with your past. You stop defending the outdated programming. You stop dragging your childhood shadows into battles they were never built to survive. And slowly, you begin to notice a change. You walk into rooms, and people sit up straighter. Not because of arrogance, but because your presence is exact. They don't know what changed, but they feel it. You no longer have off days. You have versions. Deliberate variations of your identity, tailored to dominate different terrain. This isn't performance. This is interface optimization. Because identity, when left unmanaged, becomes a liability. It becomes a comfort zone disguised as consistency. It becomes a limit. But when you engineer your identity tactically, you become like water, able to slip, strike, or still, depending on the battlefield. And now, you don't just show up. You arrive with impact. No wasted movements. No emotional leaks. No explanation. Just a presence that speaks louder than language. A presence that destabilizes lies. That neutralizes disrespect. That elevates strategy above sentiment. This is not reinvention. It's weaponization. Because when your identity is engineered on purpose, you don't just survive situations. You reshape them. You don't just handle chaos. You restructure it. You don't just walk through fire. You do it in silence and leave no ashes behind. That's the warrior identity. Not loud, not obvious, but undeniable. Built to weather storms, disarm games, and win ground before a single word is spoken. Because once your identity becomes a tool, you are no longer reacting to the world. You are redesigning your interface with it. And from that moment forward, you don't play the game. You become the system they never trained to fight. Phase 7. Cognitive asymmetry. The strategy of the untraceable mind. Most people fight on predictable terrain. Their thoughts walk in straight lines. Their arguments follow formulas. Their emotions are rehearsed responses wrapped in the illusion of authenticity. And that's why they lose. Not because they're stupid, not because they lack effort, but because they're symmetrical. They fight force with force, emotion with emotion, criticism with defense. And every time they do, they fall into the trap of predictability. But a warrior? A true warrior doesn't fight in straight lines. We operate with cognitive asymmetry, a strategic approach to mental combat that refuses to be predictable, refuses to be reactive, refuses to be readable. While others are preparing to fight you, you're already infiltrating the frame. They speak. You don't respond. You observe. You let their logic echo inside its own chamber until it begins to contradict itself. They insult. You don't defend. You reframe the ground you're both standing on so their insult becomes meaningless, like trying to wound a shadow with a blade. They challenge you. You ask a question that redirects the spotlight back to them, and suddenly, they're explaining themselves to you. Not because you outshouted them, but because you rewrote the rules of engagement mid-fight. Cognitive asymmetry is not about being clever. It's about changing the tempo of thought itself. When they expect escalation, you give silence. When they expect surrender, you give analysis. When they expect logic, you hand them a mirror and let them collapse under the weight of their own inconsistency. Because the average mind fights to be right, but the warrior's mind fights to control the frame. And whoever controls the frame controls the fight before it starts. So how do you build this asymmetry? You start by dismantling the reflexes that keep you predictable. You stop trying to win arguments. You start collapsing contexts. You stop trying to defend your point. You start asking, what would you need to see in order to believe the opposite? That one question forces them to define proof, to reveal their assumptions, to box themselves into a corner of their own construction. Now you own the battlefield, not with aggression, but with mental misdirection. And you don't just use this against enemies. You use it in business, in leadership, in negotiation, in any arena where influence is currency. Because once you think asymmetrically, you're no longer solving problems head-on. You're collapsing their very structure before they have a chance to resist. You ask what they're not asking. You point where no one is looking. You stay still while they scramble. And in their desperation to figure you out, they reveal everything about themselves. That's not luck. That's invisible dominance. Because cognitive asymmetry turns your very rhythm into a threat they cannot detect. While they train to anticipate fire, you hand them stillness. While they prepare for conflict, you drop the floor beneath their feet. And here's the killer move. You no longer fight to win. You fight to reprogram. You don't just want to be right. You want them to never think the same again. That's the essence of mental warfare. It's not brute force. It's pattern disruption at the root level. You move second, but you control the tempo. You say less, but your silence shifts the narrative. You act with precision, and by the time they recognize your intent, they've already lost. They came to battle a person, but what they encountered was a system they could not decode. That's what happens when you operate in asymmetry. You become untrackable, unshakable, and eventually undefeatable. Because once you stop fighting inside their frame, you don't just outthink them. You erase the very logic they depend on to function. And when that happens, they don't just lose the fight. They lose the ability to fight you again. Phase 8. Pressure response. Override. Weaponizing chaos into cognitive precision. Most people crumble in pressure not because they're weak, but because they were never taught to operate under fire. They were taught to chase peace, not sharpen in war. They were taught to seek comfort, not adapt under confrontation. They were taught to stay calm, but never shown how. So when the pressure hits, their system folds, their logic fragments, their breath shortens, their voice tightens, their thoughts scatter like glass underfoot. They don't make decisions. They react to fear. They obey emotion. They become passengers inside their own nervous system, hostages to biology they never trained to master. But the warrior does not collapse under pressure. We convert it. We override the reaction. We install new protocols, ones that don't just survive chaos, but thrive inside it. This isn't about pretending you're unaffected. It's about reconditioning your response until intensity becomes information, until fear becomes signal, until threat becomes clarity. So how do we override? Step 1. Breath command. You train your body to breathe slow on command. Not because you're calm, but because you're in command. When the pressure builds, you inhale low into your diaphragm. Slow, deliberate, controlled. Your nervous system is screaming, but your breath says, "We're not dying, we're deciding." That's the difference between panic and power. One obeys the body, the other leads it. Step 2. Psychological disassociation. You exit first person. You stop saying, "I'm under attack." You start saying, "He is being challenged." You narrate the moment like a strategist, watching the field, not bleeding on it. This creates space between stimulus and action. And in that space, dominance is born. Because while others are pulled by fear, you're watching it operate. You're decoding its mechanics in real time. And that third-person switch, that's not detachment. That's mental recon. Step 3. 5-second spike delay. The moment you feel the surge, the heat in your chest, the spike in your throat, the impulse to react, you pause. Not forever, just 5 seconds. But those 5 seconds, they separate the average from the apex. Because most people speak too soon, swing too fast, decide too early. But you let the storm rise, and then you channel it. You redirect it like lightning through a blade. While they're burning fuel on reaction, you're converting pressure into processing power. Because that's what pressure really is. Unrefined energy. And you've trained to refine it. So when others are losing control, you're gaining perspective. When they speak to release emotion, you speak to create precision. When they lash out to regain footing, you stay anchored and surge forward. That's not resistance. That's conversion. And once these protocols become instinct, you no longer fear pressure. You seek it. You hunt it down like a forge. You welcome the conflict. You enter the chaos, not to survive it, but to sharpen inside it. Every confrontation becomes a drill. Every insult, a calibration. Every unexpected challenge becomes a stress test for your command system. And here's what separates warriors from the rest. While others need the conditions to be perfect to perform, you condition yourself to perform under disruption. They wait for motivation. You train for adaptation. And when they finally show up, you're already 15 decisions deep, already moved past fear into functional analysis. This isn't bravery. This is mental engineering, where your response is no longer the product of your past, but the design of your preparation. You don't get rattled. You read patterns. You don't tremble. You time precision. You become the type of force that doesn't get shaken by storms, because you are the one who built their rhythm. Pressure doesn't break you. It builds your algorithm. It triggers your final form. It reveals the architecture you've been installing in silence for years. Because while they collapse into instinct, you ascend into intellect, under fire. And that is why you win. Not because you avoid pressure, but because pressure has become your sharpening stone, your trigger for clarity, your call to arms. And the moment you no longer fear it, you become the one force that systems cannot control and enemies cannot forecast. Because you don't just handle chaos, you use it as a weapon. Phase 9. Tactical identity. Engineering. Becoming the weapon. Your name, your voice, your tone, the way you enter a room, the way you sit in silence. All of it. An identity. But here's the truth no one told you. Your identity was never yours. It was sculpted by accident. You were shaped by the eyes of others, reinforced by fear, pushed into roles that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with compliance. When you were bold, they said you were arrogant. When you were quiet, they asked what was wrong. When you showed strength, they told you to soften. And when you tried to belong, they turned you into a mirror. Piece by piece, you became a version of yourself that fit the room instead of commanding it. But a warrior does not accept an identity built in reaction to weakness. We design who we must become. Not for vanity, not for applause. For one reason: leverage. Because in this war, personality is not performance. It's positioning. It's the interface through which you transmit dominance and decode the world's intentions. A warrior doesn't ask, "Who am I?" We ask, "What version of me kills the noise in this environment? What version makes manipulators hesitate? What version neutralizes conflict before it explodes? What version makes people think twice before they lie? This is not deception. It's deployment. And you begin with destruction. You strip your inherited personality to its core. You burn the traits that served survival, but now block expansion. You unhook your identity from the past. You stop saying, "I'm just not that kind of person." You start saying, "That version was a prototype. I'm building the weapon now." Because your past self was crafted in reaction. Your future self is crafted in design. And design means precision. You refine your voice until it communicates command without volume. You discipline your expression until your eyes become signals. You eliminate soft language, weak stances, and leaky emotions, like a surgeon removing infected tissue. You choose your energy, like a sniper chooses wind direction. You don't act confident. You build architecture that produces confidence under fire. And here's where most people fail. They chase consistency over adaptability. They want to just be themselves in every room, even when that version of themselves keeps losing the battle. But a warrior? We don't chase self-expression. We chase mission execution. There is no real you. There is only the most effective version of you in this terrain, at this level, with this objective. You might need to become colder, not out of cruelty, but to conserve energy. You might need to be sharper, not out of ego, but to deflect emotional debris. You might need to be more animated, not to entertain, but to penetrate the fog of distraction and grab attention by the throat. Identity engineering means you don't get hijacked by emotion. You use it as a tool. You don't get dragged by past labels. You extract their lessons and leave the skin behind. You become like liquid metal, solid under pressure, fluid when needed, and cutting through anything that resists refinement. And over time, you stop reacting altogether. Your behavior isn't a mood swing. It's a transmission, a series of calibrated signals that trigger recalibration in others. They don't know why they speak softer around you, why they second-guess their shade, why they try to explain themselves when you haven't said a word. But they feel it, because your identity isn't loud. It's undeniable. It doesn't demand. It distorts the rhythm of the room just by showing up. This is not surface-level transformation. This is deep system recoding. It's designing an internal compass that doesn't drift under pressure. A shield of traits that reflect intention, not emotion. A mental protocol that filters what enters and what gets discarded. And once it's installed, you no longer show up hoping to be seen. You show up already knowing that you'll be felt. You don't just own the room. You program the atmosphere. No wasted movements. No explanation. No repetition of who you are. Just a living architecture engineered for velocity, resilience, and cold strategic presence. You stop asking people to understand you. You stop proving your worth. You stop defending your boundaries. Because now, your existence enforces them. This is tactical identity engineering. You are no longer a reflection of your past. You are no longer a sum of your wounds. You are a construct of precision, wielded with intention and forged in silence. And when you master this, you don't just play the game more effectively. You become the force that makes others question their place in it. The warrior's mind reconstructed. You've just crossed through the 9 gates, not of motivation, but of mental reconstruction. This wasn't a speech. This was a demolition site. Every phase you walked through ripped apart a piece of programming they installed without your permission. And now, you stand at the edge of something most never reach: total internal sovereignty. You began with narrative deletion, learning to sever the lies you tell yourself in the dark, to stop spinning stories and start extracting signal. No more dramatized wounds. No more emotional malware disguised as clarity. Only facts. Only truth. Only forward. Then you installed the mirror neuron override, cutting the reflex to absorb other people's chaos. You trained your system to stop syncing to the crowd and start broadcasting stillness. You no longer reflect energy. You regulate it. From there, you tore through the collapse of the simulation, dropping every definition handed to you. Success, confidence, love, failure. You deleted the code. You rewrote your operating system from scratch. You no longer inherit reality. You build it. You then moved into perceptual weaponry, learning that attention is the new battlefield. You stopped reacting. You started watching. You refined your gaze into a tool that disarms egos and exposes agendas before a word is spoken. You learned to wage temporal warfare, to stop bleeding hours in indecision. You built a loop-based mind, one that doesn't waste energy. It converts every second into momentum. You don't move faster. You cut distance. Next came tactical identity engineering, not discovering who you are, but constructing who you must become. A shape-shifting interface designed for leverage, resistance, and domination. Then came cognitive asymmetry, the art of becoming unreadable. You don't argue. You collapse frames. You don't fight force with force. You redirect and disarm through rhythm disruption. Your mind no longer walks in lines. It moves like a ghost in smoke. Then you overrode your pressure response, teaching your body to remain precise under fire. 5 seconds of silence, third-person narration, strategic disassociation. You don't just survive stress, you weaponize it. And finally, you redefine the essence of you through engineered identity. No more default, no more old programming. Only the version that fits the terrain, executes under tension, and adapts without fracture. You've torn down the false self, rerouted the nervous system, hijacked time, bent perception, and rebuilt identity as a tool of war. You are not motivated. You are armed. This is not mindset work. This is mental warcraft. And if you've made it this far, you're no longer in the world they trained you for. You're now operating on a different frequency, one they can't predict, can't control, and will never be able to follow. Welcome to the other side. The simulation is broken. You are the rewrite.